Well, we'll want to give people a minute to connect in and stuff.
Yep. And I know you talked to my secretary, Alastair, as far as recording it. We'll certainly let you see it first. I don't think I don't think it'll be a bomb, so I don't think I'd worry about that.
Okay. Thanks.
So the attendees are coming in now.
So you guys have that survey?
Oh. No, I didn't get the, no, I don't have the survey. I wasn't able to get it done.
Oh. Do you know how to do a survey on this? Because I don't think I have control to be able to do a survey.
Hold on.
I emailed it to Mike, I think. Bobby, Lisa, and Mike. Do you want me to resend it?
No, I have it here. Hold on. Let me see what, yeah. While they're doing their intro, let me see what I can do. I don't know if I can add it live, but I think I can. Let me see here.
Wow, 37 people already. That's great.
Wow.
Seems to be holding at 37. It's funny.
Have a text message.
All right, I actually have it ready to go whenever you want to launch it. So whenever we want to launch it, I can launch it.
Yeah, just after your intro to me, you could launch it. You could say that I would like, Alastair requested that I put up a survey before he begins.
Okay,
It'll take like 2 minutes for them to get responses, or a minute or so.
okay,
Thanks, Bobby.
sure.
So we have 39. I don't mind giving a little time, but I don't want people waiting who are already on if we were supposed to start at 6.
Yeah.
Let me check my email. The email wouldn't come to me. So if there was any problems with people connecting in, I would think they would go to
You're gonna go to Lisa?
possibly.
Okay, well, I get, if it's sanitation clerk, I would get them as well. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, 39. That's a lot of them that aren't. There's like 19 or 20 that are registered but didn't sign in yet. So because the intros will only take a couple minutes, maybe the other ones will join us. They'll just miss the intro unless somebody has a problem with that.
No, no problem.
Bobby, I guess if you're ready, we can open up so I can start. I'm not sure if we do it individually or if we're just all open to speak. How does that work?
We're all open to speak. So if you want to go ahead and start, go ahead. Yeah, I would say at this point, I would say go ahead and start.
Okay. Good evening, all. I'm sure there's going to be other people joining us, but we're going to start the program so we don't inconvenience those that came on at 6 o'clock when we were scheduled. Good evening and welcome. My name is Mike Bees. I'm Superintendent of Sanitation with the Town of Glastonbury. Town of Glastonbury is very happy to partner with the Town of South Windsor and the UConn Extension Services Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture to bring you this workshop tonight. This is part of an ongoing program that both South Windsor and Glastonbury have been very passionate about to educate our communities on composting to reduce the volume of waste generated. Over the last 3 years, Glastonbury and South Windsor have partnered in the sale of backyard compost bins, rain barrels for residents. And 2 years ago, we actually sponsored this program in person with Alastair that we're going to be sponsoring tonight. That was very well received, as this one was tonight. We had nearly 70 people sign up for this program tonight between both towns. One of the largest components of the waste stream today, about 30%, is food waste and organics. The state's recycling goal by 2024 is to recycle 60% of the waste stream, and right now it's around 30 to 35%. So we have a long way to go and a lot of challenges ahead. For the town, at least for Glastonbury, right now our tip fee or disposal fee for trash is $91 a ton. It's going to escalate to $105 a ton in July of this year. So every bit of waste we can take out of the waste stream as far as trash saves taxpayers dollars. We're fortunate tonight to, again, through the UConn program, have to present this program Mr. Alastair Ong, who's a certified master composter with UConn, volunteers his time to provide educational programs like we're having tonight. But before we start, I'd like to introduce Anthony Manfrey, who's the superintendent of pollution control for the town of South Windsor.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for everyone attending this evening. As Mike mentioned, food waste makes up 30% of our waste stream. For the town of South Windsor, we typically average 7,400 tons of municipal solid waste per year, and that roughly equates out to 600 pounds of food waste per household every year. And then when this only gets compounded with the 10% increase that we've seen in the solid waste that the town's been throwing away the last year, and that's primarily due to schools being closed and more people working from home. So this is an issue that we need to address. And Glastonbury and South Windsor have been working together for the last 3 years. to help educate and offer simple solutions to help divert the food waste out of the waste stream. So, and I just want to give Mike and his entire staff in the town of Glastonbury a big thank you for spearheading this. I want to thank Alastair for his presentation. 2 years ago, he was in and did an in-person presentation. He's kind enough to share his composting secrets in both Glastonbury and South Windsor. Both presentations received rave reviews. He's an excellent presenter, and I think you'll enjoy tonight's program. You know, we were disappointed not to have Alastair back this year, but as much as we would like to have him in person tonight, Mike and I are happy to have him back. So thank you, and thank you to everyone for participating.
With that, I'm going to, Bobby Ashton, Glastonbury's IT manager, is just going to explain the logistics of the Zoom program and how we're going to operate, and then Alastair will take it from there.
Hi, everybody. Glad you could be with us tonight. Couple of things. If you're, especially if you're using a smaller screen, and if you see several of us on the screen, when Alastair starts speaking, there is an option on your screen. Some of them will have a little icon or a thing that says view. If you want to, when he's speaking, you can change it from what they refer to as a gallery view to speaker view, so you only see him while he's speaking. Sometimes that's a little bit easier for a presentation like this. I think Alastair may be showing slides and stuff like that, so in that case, it won't be as big a deal. But also, he may be, there'll be a poll we'll be launching in a minute, so you'll have an opportunity to be able to select an answer or during the poll. So please answer your poll question that he asks. And then during this presentation, he may ask for other stuff where you may be having opportunities to respond to questions. It may be somewhat interactive. And the way we do that is we may ask you to raise your hand. And of course, we can't see you. So what that means is there's a little button that says raise hand in the app. And so what you do is you click on that so that we know that you've raised your hand, and we can turn on your microphone so we can hear you. And we can see everybody. And so we go through one at a time. We turn on the mic so that we can then get people to ask questions, and that's how we'll do it. So when we get ready to do that, or when Alastair says, hey, if anybody's got a question on it during whatever times he's doing that, people can raise their hand then, and then we can turn their people's mics on to do that. So just look for the raise hand button on whichever app. And I can't say exactly where it's going to be because depending upon which device you're using, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone or a PC, it'll be in a different spot, but you should be able to find it fairly easy. And with that, it should be fairly easy to use. So I hope everybody enjoys it, and I'll hand it back over to Mike and we'll go from there.
Okay, with that, we will introduce Alastair Ong, as I indicated before, with the UConn Extension Service, and he will handle the program. We are also on it. We've gotten a lot of phone calls from folks want to know if we're going to put this on our website or on the town's website for South Windsor and Glastonbury. We are working on that. I don't want to make any promises, but we will send at least the people on this program tonight a note, and we'll let you know that, and we'll publish it certainly on the town's website for those that could make it tonight, but we certainly want to promote it. But thank you again, and we'll let Alastair have at it. Thank you.
Anthony, could you launch the survey? I'm sorry, Bobby, could you launch the survey?
It's launched right now, so everybody should be able to see it.
Bobby, can you tell when everyone's answered the survey?
I would say that we've got 92% have voted, and there hasn't been any activity on it in the last 30 about 25 seconds or so. So I would say we're probably done.
Can you give me the breakdown of the answers?
Sure. Absolutely. We had, there was none that said probably never will, never done. We had 26% had never done it before, but I'm open to trying. We had 24 stop because it failed or were too difficult. We have 50% who say I compost regularly. And we didn't have anybody who said I'm an expert and should be giving this presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bobby.
Okay.
So I first want to thank Anthony and Mike and the town of Glastonbury, South Glastonbury for inviting me. You know, thank you. Thanks for seeing the results. You know, so the results are really indicative of a community. I think every time I've given a survey, the results are somewhat the same. You get about 25% of the people that say they've tried it, but they failed. And a lot of my neighbors know I'm a master composter, and so they come to me with their composting issues. And the most common complaint I get is the spring comes around, which is perfect for composting. We'll go out and they, with the best of intentions, they go and buy a composting kit, like a barrel tumbler or some sort of a composting barrel or bucket. And then they put, you know, and with that composting kit comes a little index card that has things that you should compost. And it's a list of stuff. And then, you know, then things that you should not compost. And then, you know, a list of things like dog bones and meat products and oil and fish and batteries, you know, like, so, you know, basically, you know, they get this little card, they read the instructions, and they start putting in their kitchen scraps into this composting tub, and they turn it, and then they, you know, diligently feed it again with more kitchen scraps, and they turn it, and then by the end of 8 months, they open it up, and they find that they have kitchen garbage in their composting tub, and they expect to have beautiful rich compost they can use in their gardens, and in fact, what comes out is they have kitchen scraps that are just partially fermented or you know, just like gathered in a tub. So so this presentation is going to solve all those problems. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. So my journey in composting began about 25 years ago when I was in New York City, where I lived for the last 25 years, except for I'm sorry, 25 years, less 5 years since I moved to Connecticut. And in New York City, they disallowed, for much of my living there, they disallowed the use of carburetors. Carburetors are those things that sit in your sink that use up food and puts it into your septic system if you're in Connecticut. Or in New York, the reason why they banned them is because it went into the waste treatment, the water treatment system. So they banned it because they didn't want to tax the water treatment system. What happened with New York City is they started, you know, New York City needs to pay large sums of money to put their garbage on barges and then pay facilities to take New York City's garbage. And New York City generated so much garbage that it just became so costly. And they did this analysis where they determined that 25 to 40% of all garbage was food scraps. So rather than thinking about, well, can we come up with a composting system, New York City just fell back to, well, if it's food scraps, let's allow the use of carburetors and then have our wastewater treatment facility deal with it. So they really just passed the buck. And rather than develop and install a carburetor in my sink, I just started thinking about there must be a better way to deal with my scraps, my kitchen scraps, and my compostable materials. And then that was my journey in composting. And ever since then, which was about 22 years ago, I've been composting even in my little tiny apartment. And I'll tell you how I did that later on in this presentation. So the question is, what is composting? Composting, when I think of composting, I think of decaying. And as anyone who's watching this presentation, who's in their mid 40s to mid 50s, which is probably the demographic of people looking at this composting, you probably are well aware of decay. So composting, if the actual definition of composting is the acceleration of the natural decay process. And that's why these composting kits don't necessarily work well, because nowhere in nature do you see a bunch of kitchen scraps in a pile trying to compost, right? I mean, you see things in nature, and a composting tub is not natural. So that's why these composting tubs generally don't work unless you're going to add other materials to it. And so this presentation will teach you a simple, super great recipe that that makes composting easy. So why compost? The reason why you should compost is basically, and this I have on a different slide, but every agricultural study you'll read will tell you that 2 inches of compost is enough material to fertilize your plants, your grass, and provide enough moisture, because compost absorbs moisture, holds moisture, and it provides enough nutrients for your plants for a full year. So I'll repeat that. 2 inches of compost is enough to fertilize your plants for a full year. You don't need additional fertilizers. You don't need, the lime. You could do soil testing, and if your pH is a little bit imbalanced, compost won't necessarily fix that, but it won't hurt your soil. So compost is the greatest thing, and the fact that you can do it yourself at home for free is just an additional benefit. So here is where I want everyone to close their eyes and repeat this statement. I'm going to say a statement, and I want everyone to close their eyes and say the statement. Compost needs ores with T. So everyone, I want you to think of an image of this statement. Compost needs ores with T. So if you come up with, I'm big with mnemonics. So basically, I've just taught you everything that I've learned as a master composter, and 90% of all composting presentations will have those elements. So compost, the C of compost begins with carbon, right? So you need some carbon material in your compost. Needs, the N from needs is nitrogen. So a successful composting has carbon and nitrogen. And that's why these tubs don't necessarily work, because your kitchen scraps are cold nitrogen foods. And in order to make it into compost, you need to mix carbon, and generally you need more carbon than you do nitrogen. You need a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you just keep adding your kitchen scraps without adding carbon, like leaves or newspapers, you're going to end up with just a hot mess. So compost needs ores. The O of ores is oxygen. So you need oxygen, and the best way to get oxygen into your compost is by turning. However, the recipe that I'm going to go over with you today doesn't require any turning. So compost needs ores with, the W for with is water. And you need to have the right moisture levels. And they sell at composting facilities, they sell like, water meters so that you can determine whether your compost has the right moisture levels. Again, my composting recipe, you won't need to know how much water to add. So compost needs ores with T. The T from T is temperature. So you need the proper temperature, and when your composting heap is developing, it actually hits different thermal temperature levels, which inspires different types of bacteria to consume your compost. Again, they sell thermometers for your thermometers with long probes. They can stick into your compost to make sure you can determine what stage your compost is at. My composting recipe that I'm going to go over with you today is not going to require a thermometer. So this presentation is going to talk about 2 methods of composting. But these are the things you're going to need for composting. Now, the problem with the webinar is I can't see people in their reactions. When I show the slide in person, people just they read the first one. They're like, what the hell are you talking about, Al? Like, you need a kilo of woolly mammoth scat, or you could just use leaves. So leaves are amazing. Typically in the fall, when leaves fall, the average American male, they get out their leaf blower, and they blow their leaves onto their neighbor's lawn. And then that neighbor wakes up, sees all this leaves on his yard. He gets out his leaf blower, blows it onto his neighbor's lawn. And then that goes on for a few months until one of them smartens up and says, well, I better go to the local hardware store or the local home despot to buy what we in the industry call SPBs. They're actually labeled stupid people bags, but I think that's a little bit offensive. So I'll call them silly people bags, which are those bags people stuff leaves into and they leave on their sidewalk for pickup by the facility or their town or their recycling or their trash companies. The reason why I think they're silly people bags is because to me, they advertise that you're too silly to realize that you have everything that you need in those bags to produce the richest compost that you'll ever see. And the advantages of leaf compost is what I've said. It's easy. It's not going to be labor intensive. It's not going to require any turning. It won't smell bad. So therefore it won't attract pests. It's super efficient. And it's going to produce the best compost available with the exception of maybe worm poop, which I'll go over later on in this presentation. You won't need to know anything about composting. You won't need to monitor temperature, moisture, your pH levels, or your carbon nitrogen balance. And this is because trees are the most amazing things in this world because every year their roots go deeper and deeper into the earth where nothing has ever touched it. And it pulls up moisture and nutrients that go to its leaves. And through the doubling of the magic of photosynthesis, the leaves get super nutrienated. And then they, in the fall, they fall, and they dance as they fall. And they say, look at me, I'm falling, I'm useful. And then they drop at our feet. And again, 2 inches of leaf compost is all that plant needs to be fed or protected from disease for an entire season. So that is the most amazing thing about leaves is you could use it as the single ingredient for your compost heap. So people always ask me, okay, so I got my leaves. What do I add to them to compost? The answer is nothing. You don't need to add anything to leaves. I had my aha moment about this recipe. I've been composting for 25 years. When I moved to Connecticut, I took the UConn Master Composting class to learn more about composting, which was really more physics and chemistry tutorial than anything. And all I was looking for was a super easy recipe for composting. And then one year I have a friend who lives in France and she had 3 kids. And because it was difficult for kids to find jobs in France, she asked if I used their help. And so I used the daughters to help me around the house. And the son did like garden work on my property. And he made a mention to one of his sisters and he said this, and I heard him say, why does Alastair hate his leaves so much? And I was like, and I overheard him and I interrupted. I was like, Damien, what are you talking about? I love leaves. It's the basis of my compost. He goes, well, why do you mix your leaves with garbage? Because I was throwing my kitchen scraps in with my leaves. And in France, their whole system of composting is called leaf mold. They just gather every leaf they can and they compost it and they don't mix it with anything. And that is a European system of composting. It's standard in Europe to just compost their leaves. And they use that leaf compost and they sell it, to provide the nutrients and pest resistance for plants. The one exception that you could add to leaf compost is coffee grounds. It's a hot ingredient, meaning that it's got hot nitrogen and it's got carbon. So if you've got a big mound of leaves, you could add coffee grounds to it, spent coffee grounds. I think if you go to coffee shops like Starbucks or your local coffee barista, they give you their coffee grounds gladly because they would otherwise need to throw it away and pay to get it carted away. So you could get, and they'll give it to you by the bucket load. So if you've got a 5-gallon bucket, they'll fill it. If you got a 10-gallon bucket, they'll fill that. And if you add that to your leaf composting, it will accelerate and make the compost better. So that's the only thing that you need to add to your leaf compost. So the dirty little secret about composting is that the right amounts of kitchen scraps won't help or won't hurt your compost, and little amounts of the wrong compost won't, I'm sorry, the secret about composting is the right amounts of kitchen scraps may help your compost, but the wrong small amounts of the wrong amounts of composting materials, kitchen scraps, won't hurt your compost. But 99% of your compost will be the leaves. So even if you're going to be using the carbon nitrogen balance, 2 times carbon to 1 time nitrogen. So that means for every pound of kitchen scraps, you need 2 pounds of leaves or newspaper. And it's really the leaves of the newspaper that will turn to compost. So what's the catch of leaf composting? You know, you've heard this recipe. Oh my God, all I need are my leaves. That's amazing. There must be a catch. The catch is leaves have to be shredded. So I've got 3 examples of shredders, of which I have all 3. The first one is a leaf blower. And they almost all electric leaf blowers nowadays, or even gas blowers, have an attachment that they call a conversion kit. And I call it a conversion kit because generally the leaf blower could be 15 years old and the conversion kit is brand new in the garage or the basement, never used. But you could basically, a leaf blower could turn into a suction device, and it's got this plastic or metal impeller that will shred the leaves at a ratio of 8:1. So that bag will hold 8 times the volume of leaves that you're sucking up. So that is amazing because by picking up the leaves, it's automatically shredding it, and then you can go right from that bag to your leaf composter, and then you're done. I also call that a conversion kit because when people realize that they can use it as blowing, but for sucking, I think people see God. They're like, oh my God, I'm converted. The second one is it's just a leaf shred. It's basically, it's like got these 3 nylon strings, which are like a weed whacker strings, and you put leaves in the top, and then it goes through the impeller, and then on the bottom, shredded leaves will come out. The third one I actually bought, mine happens to be called the Big Red Machine. They're expensive. It's gas operated. It can also ship twigs and branches, which is why I bought it. But you can also, in that red hole in the front, you can also put leaves into it, or into the I'm sorry, the holes for the branches. You put the leaves in the black bin in the back, and then it'll shred it again at a ratio of 10:1. So 10 of leaves turns into 1 bag of shredded leaves. So the things that you should think about when you're doing your leaf composting is where you're going to locate it. It should be like a place that can be drained so it doesn't get too wet. Like you shouldn't put it in a dip in your property. Otherwise, it'll get too wet and that'll prevent composting. It should be somewhat sunny, or at least get sun at least some parts of the day. The ideal pile is about 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 foot. And that's also called a Lehigh bin. I think popularized by a guy at the University of Pennsylvania who came up with that 4 by 4 by 4 bin. And you should just think about the coarseness of the ingredients. If you're going to feed your compost bin with twigs or sawdust or wood chips, the smaller the pieces, the faster it'll compost. These are some composting cages that I've come across in my time working as a master composter. The one on the left, the wooden one, that's what a Lehigh bin looks like, 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. The round one is one that we use in Bridgeport for a farming center. They basically just bought galvanized wire, and you make a round using zip ties. You put that in the ground, you put your leaves in it, and then after a month, they would pick up the cage, and then the leaves will create a mold of like cylinder, and then they simply move the cage to another location right beside it, and they use a pitchfork to pitch the leaves back into the cage, and that is to turn it. Now, my composting recipe does not require any turning. However, if you do turn it, the compost will produce faster. You can only use pallets to make a composting cage. Just if you're going to use pallets, make sure that the stamp is not MB, which stands for methyl bromide, which is a thing to resist pests and mold and algae. You want it to be HT, heat treated. The methyl bromide, the reason that is if you're going to put anything that's going to come in contact with the methyl bromide, it may leach out into your compost. And if you're using that to fertilize your vegetable garden, you are what you eat. So you may become, you may actually be consuming the methyl bromide from the pellets. This is a multi-bin system. This is for traditional composting system. Basically most multi-bin systems have 3 containers. This one's got 4. The way I would use a 3 or 4 bin container like this is you put your feed 1, like the first one on the left, and then after you're ready to turn it, you would pitch it. So the walls between these are empty. Are wood panels that are removable. So then you'd pitch 1 and put it into 2, and then start feeding the C, and then pitch 2 back into 1 every month, and you're feeding C. And then when 1 and 2 are ready, it goes into 4 as finished compost, and then 3 gets pitched back into 1, and then you keep repeating that process. So 1 and 2 are turn-ins, the 3rd one's a holding bin, and the 4th one is finished compost. So that, here is the methyl bromide versus heat-treated composting materials if you're going to use a pallet. This is actually my composting pile. You can see on the left is, what compost pile looks like when it's generally new. And then the B photograph isn't really what the finished compost pile looks like. Basically, when you see the compost finish, so if you start in the fall, like in September, by December, by the first snowfall, your compost should be reduced by half. And then when the spring comes rolling around, your compost should be half of that, so 25% of that. However, the compost pile will still look like the photograph on the left. But the magic of composting is when you use a pitchfork or a rake to brush off the top layer, what you expose is this layer. So this photograph doesn't have the layer of leaves because I've removed them and put them in a different composting bin. And then this is just my finished compost that I'm using in the spring for my vegetables and my grass. So then if you're going to use leaves and you're not going to use your kitchen scraps with your leaves, the question remains, well, what are you going to do with your kitchen scraps? The major problem I have with kitchen scraps going into the compost isn't that it's not helping my compost or not hurting my compost. It's just that in the wintertime, when you're putting your kitchen scraps out there, the Connecticut winters are just brutal and you get snow. So when you're putting out your kitchen scraps, the snow prevents decay. So you're really preserving your kitchen scraps in the snow. And that's just going to attract vermin like raccoons, rats, mice, coyotes, because they're going to just eat your kitchen scraps that have been preserved nicely by the snow and the cold. So my answer to kitchen scrapping is composting. This is the method of composting that I've used ever since I was in New York City. So when I first learned about composting, I realized that there were 2 composting. I learned from a person who was a botanist. I could compost using bokashi, which is a bacteria pellet that you could buy. And then you have a bucket or kitchen scraps and you spread the bokashi on it. And then you put more kitchen scraps and with every addition of kitchen scraps, you add more bokashi. And the bokashi is bacteria that will consume the kitchen scraps and then turn it into compost. And it does it in a hot fashion. So it'll be very hot. The second way of composting was worm composting. And worm composting is amazing because so there's a saying that a worm composter told me. He said, there's something magical that happens in the belly of a worm because the nutrients that come out of one end of the poop end is more valuable than the materials that went into the mouth end. And that is completely true. Though at the time I had a girlfriend and I was thinking, well, I've got to decide on these 2 methods of composting, which way should I compost? And I remember bringing her up these 2 alternatives, remember cringing at the word worms because at the time I never thought a woman would like the idea of worms, but I did know that I married the right woman because my wife said, worms, oh, we got to get worms. I love worms. I have a photograph like this with my wife petting a worm, but I couldn't find it. So this is a frog that she found in my pool. And she just loves like worms and, like creepy crawling things and insects. Like she's just a lover of those things. So I knew I married right when I married my wife because she opted on worm composting. So I have a worm condo, which I'll show you right here. And basically it's a bin that on every bottom layer, there's a screen. So you feed the top layer and all the worms will go up in the top and they'll start feeding. And then when you're done, when the top bin is halfway full, you remove the bottom empty one and put it on top of the feeding one, and you start feeding that one. And the worms know to go through the screen to the feeding bin. And then some worms will remain in the second one. But when the top one is half full, then you reach again for another empty screen and you put that on. And then by the time the worms to the top screen, the third one is already finished compost. This is a 5-bin system. I only have 3 bins because I find that, I use enough food to feed 3 bins of worms. And by the 3rd month, the bottom bin is already finished compost with no worms in it. So let me go back. So worms in a nutshell, worms are not native to the Americas, believe it or not. There are 4,500 species of worms worldwide. None of them are native to the United States or the Americas. They all come, they all come from New England. They all come from all parts of South America or Europe, Africa, Australia, but there are no worms native to New England. The best type of worm to compost is a worm that I'll go over. It's called a red wriggler. And the reason that they're the best worm to use is they eat their weight per day in food. So I'll repeat that again. A red wriggler will consume its weight per day in kitchen scraps. So if you've got 1 pound of worms, they will consume 1 pound of kitchen scraps in 1 day, which is amazing. So I think I've got about 3 pounds of worms. So they go through about 3 pounds of kitchen scraps every day. So every day I feed it, every day it disappears. So it's amazing. You put a watermelon rind in 1 day and the next day it's gone. It's just amazing. This is worm physiology. I just love this because worms don't have eyes, teeth, or lungs, but they do have 5 hearts. So any animal that's got 5 hearts is an animal for me. So the good, the bad, and the ugly about worms, good is they're real low maintenance, and you should look at them as pets because then you'll treat them well. You can indoor compost during the winter, which is just a major plus. You don't need a yard. I did it in New York City in my apartment for 20 years. They're low cost. It's also not going to smell. Whenever I would have worms and I would tell people I compost, they'd be like, "Oh my God, it must stink." So I always lifted up the bin and had them smell it. And the descriptions I got was, it smells like a soccer field after a rainstorm. That's the best description I've got. And that's really what it smells like. It should smell like really rich earth. It's also, another question I always get about worms is, aren't you scared they're going to crawl out and crawl into your bed? And the answer is no. The environment of a worm bin is that the worm loves. So there's no reason for them to leave. The reason why you see worms after a rainstorm is the ground is getting flooded and they can't breathe. So they come out. So the only time your worm will leave your worm bed is if the conditions are such that the worm doesn't like it. So if you keep the conditions well, they'll stay in your worm bin. The bad is composting worms are an exotic species, and it's hard to find legitimate red wrigglers. At the end of this presentation, I have a place that I recommend that I've been to, I visited, and they're completely crazy about red wrigglers. And if you order from them, you'll get the right worms. There's a worm called the crazy snake worm, which actually looks like a snake, and it's also called the jumping worm because it jumps. The thing about this worm is, I think it's from Asia, but through shipping plants and bamboo to the United States, they now live in the New England ground and earth. And if you ever see a forest without many trees and there's no undergrowth, it's likely that the crazy snake worm is there. The worst thing about the crazy snake worm is when it burrows tunnels, it's like the opposite of a composting worm. It kills organisms rather than supporting its life. So if you see a forest that has no underbrush, but it's thinly populated with with trees, then you know that there's maybe an outgrowth of crazy snakeworm there. Trees are another thing that I forgot to mention are bullies, right? Like when trees have their leaves, they close off through the miracle of the seasons, they'll close off their pores, and then the leaves will turn around and then they'll fall. But the reason they fall is not just to seal off their pores, but also to create like a tarp-like material on the forest floor. And that's to prevent growth so that their offspring have a difficult time growing. And that's another reason why you should need to shred your leaves. Is it possible to not to use unshredded leaves? Answer, yeah, but if you shred them, it'll compost much faster. Rather than trying to compost a tarp, you're composting a shredded material, which would compost faster. There was a town, and I'm not sure if it's Glastonbury, there was a town that was composting, and then they had shredders. So one of you guys will have to tell me if it was Glastonbury. I gave a presentation last year, and they told me that they had shredded their leaves, but their shredding guy said that they didn't need to shred it. So they left a portion of their compost leaves unshredded, and they were going to see if it composted faster or equal to the shredded leaves. And if it was South Glastonbury, you're going to have to back to me for the results of that study. My thought was the shredded leaves would compost much faster. So what do you need to compost with worms? Well, you're going to need a container. You're going to need some bedding material. You're going to have to think about moisture, ventilation, temperature, pH, and food. So really, to simplify this, just think of them as a pet, and you want to provide them the best environment possible. So a pound of worms is roughly 1,000 worms. And as I said, a pound of worms will eat a pound of garbage and produce a pound of compost per day. Again, the disclaimer, I'm a lawyer, so the disclaimer is actual results will depend on my results won't necessarily be your results. Interestingly, my worms don't seem to like eggshells. I have chickens, so I used to crush the eggshells and put in my worm compost. My finished compost would look beautifully brown with all these little white specks, which were the eggshells. But I've had other composters tell me that their worms love eggshells. So I'm not sure if it's my worms or my breed of worms, or maybe my food is so tasty that they don't like eggshells. I'm not really sure. But this is my like a cross section of my worm condo. A worm condo costs about $75, less than $100 on Amazon. You could search for worm composting bin, look for a layered or a tiered structure. I would say for most households dealing with 1 to 3 pounds of compost of kitchen scraps a day, 3 to 5 layers would be enough. The bedding material, the best bedding material is coconut coir, which is the fiber of an old coconut. But shredded newspaper works. And I've also had people ask me all the time, what do I feed my worms if I'm going on vacation? The answer is shredded newspaper. You can just get, all the documents that you shred or newspaper, just rip it up, place a 3-inch layer of it, and you're good for months. Like, the worms will go through the shredded paper like food, and they'll be happy with it. So if you put, if you're going to go away for longer, I would put more shredded paper down. The moisture level, the way that I like to think about moisture is if you pick up the compost and squeeze it, if you see drops of liquid, it's too wet. So just add more newspaper. If you're squeezing it and then you let go of the mound and it doesn't have like a dirt bomb, then it's too dry. If it just crumbles into individual grains, it's too dry. And you want to squirt it with some water till you can make a mound like a great dirt bomb. That's the way to think of it. Worms can breathe with their skin, so you're going to need ventilation. So if you're going to use a bucket for your worm bin, you drill holes in the roof. I would drill holes in the top and on the top portion of the sides. So not where the line is dividing the bucket, on the top portion of that, I would put the holes there. The reason why you wouldn't put it on the bottom is because that's where your kitchen scraps are going. That's where the compost is going to be made. And if you have holes there, compost may spill out and it could get a little bit messy. By the way, as a way of future advertisement, I do have how to make your own worm bin. presentation. I think I've done it in a few towns. The last time I did it was in Westport. There were about 100 people there. We had kids, and I bring worms. And so you walk in with nothing and you walk out with a worm bin. So that's something that maybe that we could get the town to get into. That would be great. Temperatures, just think of a pet, like how your dog would be comfortable, your worms would be comfortable. If it's 40 to 50 degrees, they'll still survive, but they'll be very low activity. Above 95, it's going to be too hot. By way of example, I created a worm composting system for an elementary school in my town, and during Christmas break, they said that I told them to feed it with newspaper, and they did, but apparently their heating system went on the fritz, and so when they repaired it, they were testing the temperature, and they had the temperature above 95 degrees for a week. And when the teachers and kids came back to school, it was a mess because you didn't really notice them, but worms were everywhere on the classroom. So they crawled out of the worm bin looking for some respite from this temperature, and wherever they crawled, it was still 95 degrees or hotter, and they died and they dried up on the floor. So when you walked on the classroom, you heard this crunching on the floor, and that is, it just looked like an apocalypse of worms. Just with my worm bin, I've had my worms for 25 years or more. I had it in my back porch because I understood that they couldn't live in the cold weather of New England. Last year, they survived my back porch outdoors. This year, I put them in my front porch, which is much more exposed. And just 2 weeks ago, I checked up on them and they had all died. So I would recommend, if you're going to be putting your worm bin in a place, the ideal place is a basement or your garage. Like, even if your garage can get cold, your worms will survive. But anything outside, even a back porch, they may survive. They did survive in the back porch, but they didn't thrive. So I would say you'd want to keep them in your garage or your basement. pH is, it's like a chemistry thing. I wouldn't say you would need to buy a pH tester, although you could buy pH test strips from Dwayne Reed very cheap, or Walgreens very inexpensively. I would say the pH should be of that of water, drinking water. pH 7 or thereabouts is okay. Battery acid, no, that's not good. Lye and bleach, the pH is too basic, it's too high. It's also not good. So anything in the range of what you're eating is appropriate for worms. The way that I collect my kitchen scraps is I collect them in these kitchen collectors. My lid has a carbon filter, so it's not going to smell bad. And then once a week, I put in about 7 to 10 pounds of compost in my worm bin. So I feed my worms about once a week, and then I bring the empty container back to my kitchen. That's just convenient for me. You could feed your worms every day if you want. The worm populations are amazing because it'll adapt to the amount of food you're feeding it. So if you're feeding it 10 pounds a week, the worms will adjust their population to be able to consume that. If you feed them less, the population will dwindle. So it's a self-regulating pet. It's amazing. They're just absolutely, I've got nothing but great things to say about worms. So what food to give to your worms? I would say give them everything that you're eating. The big thing about composting is they say not to give it animal byproducts, meat or dairy products, chicken bones, that kind of stuff. It's not that you can't compost them. In fact, at the master composting class, we had a farmer come in that lost like 50 head of cattle, and he wanted to compost them. And we came up with a recipe that involved, lobster shells and that we got from Maine to compost cow bones. Again, composting is decay, and animal bones will decay as well as lettuce leaves. The reason why you're not going to add meat byproducts and dairy products or oily products to your compost is because it'll attract other things that'll compete with your composting bacteria. That'll be things like maggots, right? Maggots are big in meat, or flies, or beetles and mites that are specific to dairy products. Like cheese, it'll compete with your worms, and you don't want that. You don't want a worm bin that has competition. You want a worm bin where the worms love eating, and they're they're the alpha predator in that worm bin. You know, they're the ones that'll eat everything. Yeah, this is the what to avoid for your worm. I would say anything oily, and I mean, if you're gonna put, you can put bits of, you know, chicken and stuff, and it'll be fine. But if you're gonna see, if you start seeing maggots or you start seeing other things, separating them from your worm bin may be a challenge once you get the mites, and once you get the maggots, you know, they may thrive in your worm bin, and that's not a good thing. So I would say, just for safety, don't even add any of these things. So how do you sort the worm casings, which is what worm poop is called? There's a few different ways you can, you know, if you have the worm condo, they're self-sorting, which is what I love about it. The bottom bins will always be dry and ready to be used in your garden, while the top bins are your feeding bins. And you can do what's called a dump and sort, where you dump onto a big tarp or a bed sheet, and you sort out the worms. You pull them out manually, and then the rest that you're left over is with composting. You could use self-sorting, which is you dump it, and then on one side it's sunny, or in your worm bin you could feed one side of your worm bin, and the worms will migrate over to the side that you're feeding, and then the other side you can harvest. It may not be 100%, but then again, the worms will be good for your garden as well. So some problems, barriers to worms, the unpleasant odor, it's always going to be about moisture or about the type of food that you're feeding it. So like one year I had, you know, I belong to an organic delivery service. I can figure out what they're calling, FMA, or this is a name for it, but in any event, I ordered one when I was in New York, and these great vegetables came, but we found we couldn't consume all the food that was coming, so a lot of it was going to my composting bin. And because these vegetables were organic, they didn't have pesticides on them, so we just had this massive problem with fruit flies. And fruit flies are amazing because they're not annoying, they don't sting, but they're just everywhere. And so we came up with every fruit fly trap known to man, and we placed it around the composting bin. And eventually we solved the problem with a simple mason jar with a funnel, and we put a banana and some brandy in the bottom of the jar. Fruit flies would go in, but they couldn't come out. So that was what we did. So these are some references that I've come across, some good references while being a master composter in composting. And this is my contact information. And I think I had the worms. If you're going to buy worms, buy it from the worm ladies. You know, I've been to a number of different worm farms. There's one that will come up consistently. I think they do Google AdWords, and they market it pretty aggressively. I went to their worm bin farm, and they had barrels buried in the ground, and they just dumped their red wrigglers in the worm bin next to the ground. And so what it didn't prevent was other worms from migrating in with the red wrigglers, potentially reproducing, and then having like an alternative species of worm. The worm ladies, those women are crazy. They're fanatical about the red wrigglers. So if you're gonna order worms, I would order it from them. And that is my presentation. So I want to thank you guys very much for joining, and happy composting.
You want to take some questions, Alastair?
Sure, yeah, of course.
All right. So looks like we do have a question. So the first question is from Sarah Gruber. Let me turn her mic on.
Daddy, you have a text
So,
message.
so Sarah, I've turned your mic on.
Great. Can you
So-
hear me?
Yes, can you state your
Yes,
name?
Sarah.
Sure. My name is Sarah Gruber. I don't have a leaf composting area or the desire to do worm composting. I have one of those tumblers. What recipe would you suggest for a tumbler composter bin?
Okay, so with a tumbler, the number one thing that I think most people fail at is adding enough carbon. So enough brown materials like newspapers. So just think of every pound of kitchen scraps that you're adding to your tumbler or green material, you need 2 times the amount of brown material. So if you can't get leaves, sawdust works, branches, like chipped branches works. Newspaper works great. Shredded mail, junk mail works, so long as it doesn't have any ink or color or plastic in it, like from the return labels. They sometimes plastic on those envelopes. But any carbon material would be, I would say, 2 times to every pound of green, you want 2 pounds of brown.
Is there anyone else that has any questions? Please raise your hand in the app. Okay, we got a few more. All right, we've got one that just has a phone number. Let me click this one. It's got the listed number 36621. I'm going to turn the mic on. Actually, I'm unable to turn the mic on. It's saying it's using an older version of Zoom. I can't turn the mic on that one.
Maybe they can ask the question in the chat.
Let me get back.
They got the chat
I'll see if I
feature.
can get back to. Actually, they kind of went away. I don't even see that one anymore. All right, so let me go to the next one. The next one is named Marcia. I'm going to turn yours on. Marcia, I've turned your mic on.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Helps if you hit the unmute button on your side too. So I have a tumbler also. I have boatloads of leaves, so I'm totally going to look at that reversing thing for my leaf blower. But my question is, coffee grounds, do those count as green or brown?
They really count as both.
Ooh.
They're really like a hot nitrogen ingredient. So if you've got coffee ground, you can't, it's sort of like compost. So there was an expression I was supposed to say, like I've heard in the past, this is a bit sexist, but it's the way the expression works. It says a woman can't be too thin, a man can't be too rich, and the third, you can never have too much compost. So, but my formula to the coffee grounds, if someone asked me how many coffee grounds can I add, the answer is you can never add too many or too little. So if you add just a pound from your daily coffee, that works. If you've got like, if you own a coffee barista, if you own a coffee shop, you've got 100 pounds of coffee, you can compost that. And that
I don't have that much, but I do have my daily coffee that is probably makes up, I would say, 2/3 of the weight of my compost bucket when I dump it each time I dump it. So does that sound right?
Yeah.
I found my compost last year was fairly watery. It seemed to work. Actually, I grew some accidental cantaloupes because apparently the seeds didn't decompose far enough, but that was fine. But like I wasn't sure about the wateriness level, and so I've been adding sawdust this past winter to my pile because my tumbler doesn't really work in the winter; it freezes shut.
Right. Yeah. No, I think sawdust, leaves, any brown materials, newspapers, that'll help soak up the moisture and make your compost much less watery.
Okay, awesome. That was my gut feeling.
So a true story, I gave the same presentation, the same version of this presentation to New Canaan. And there was a woman that raised her hand and I said, yes. And she was an older woman. And she's like, could you tell me what a leaf blower is? And I thought, oh, we're in New Canaan. Okay, that noise on Saturday mornings that's really annoying. That's
all those
a leaf blower.
guys running around.
Oh, okay. I know what that is. Like, I was like, right, you got to speak to your audience. Like, I don't think the woman had ever picked up a leaf blower in her life. She didn't even know what it was.
I think I've injured my shoulders because of my leaf blower.
All right, the next one is Barb. I'm going to turn her mic on. Barb, I've enabled your mic so you can turn it on.
Hi, this is Barbara Matthews, and my question is, we have chickens, and at the bottom of their coop, we put down a combination of straw and pine shavings, but of course, there's a lot of chicken poop too. Is that green or brown? What is it? Or is it a little bit of both?
Chicken poop is great because, we have chickens as well. We have, where they roost, we have just, I think we use like a hemp kind of material, and we scoop that into buckets and we give that directly to my relatives. Like they love the chicken poop. They use the chicken poop alone as fertilizer. So it's a type of compost that you don't, I don't think you would need to, I mean, you could finish it if you were concerned about bacteria, but I know that my uncles and aunts in Queens, all they do is they dig up the soil, they layer chicken poop directly from my coop into the ground, they cover it with dirt, and then they plant their plants in that.
So I always
So you could
understood
use,
that. I'm sorry. I was going to say.
but if you're going to compost it, I would count that as almost like a coffee ground, like
Okay.
almost like a net zero. So if you wouldn't need to add browns to it, you could just just use it in your. How do you compost, Barb? Do you use a bin or like an outdoor
Bins.
composting heap?
We have bins.
Yeah. So if you use it, I would use that as a net zero, and so you wouldn't need to add any brown materials to the chicken poop.
Okay. I was always told that when you use it direct from the coop, though, it's too it could burn your vegetables or things like that.
It's too acidic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the same, but I guess my uncles, what they do is they'll scoop away like 2 or 3 inches of soil, and then they'll sprinkle the chicken poop. Like I usually give 2 or 3 buckets each to them, and they got maybe, I don't know, like maybe 10 by 10 foot raised bed gardens. So they'll put 1 bucket in a raised bed garden. So it's a really light sprinkling, and then they'll cover it with dirt. So if you're using it straight, it will be too acidic and it may burn. But if you're using it in moderation, it's a great additive to your soil.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question, Barb.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to move on to Carolyn Scarparas, I think it is. All right, Carolyn, I've enabled your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation. Super helpful. I have never composted before, but I've been wanting to try it. If you covered this already, sorry, I had to step away for a minute. Is there an ideal time that I should start? Or is it just kind of whenever?
So, the spring is a good time because most people think about composting in the spring because they're growing materials as well. So they're outdoors and so but I would say anytime's a time to start. If you've got a lot of property and you've got a lot of leaves, the best time to start is in the fall to create your leaf composting. But if you're gonna, there's no, again, you can never have too much compost, right? So
Yeah.
It's not like you can come to the end of a season and say, oh my God, I wish I made less. And compost takes time. So the sooner you start, the sooner you'll get product results. So if you're not composting now and you want to start, if you want to start leaf composting, it may be not the season unless you've got, like if you got property like mine in a forest and you've got leaves in the forest and you're doing a yard cleanup, you could use those leaves. And if you're going to leaf compost in the spring and summer, the compost will produce very, very quickly because in the warmth, shredded leaves compost very quickly. If you wanted to start with a worm bin, you could start, with your kitchen scraps there. Or last year when I gave this presentation, South Glastonbury was giving away composting bins or selling composting bins, which were great. Composting bins, it was a nice one. I looked at it and I researched the features of it, and it was a nice composting bin that giving selling. So if you have something that you want to start with, I would say there's no time better than the present.
Okay, did you link a worm? I'm more interested in the worm composting. I have a 5-year-old daughter who is obsessed with worms, so I think it'd be fun for her and good for me, like a win-win. Did you have anything linked that you find like the best one that you like or anything like that?
Yeah, so the one I use is called a worm condo. I think on Amazon they sell for probably around $75. I would get a 3 or 5. Is it just you and your daughter and your husband, or do you have more members to your family?
Nope, just the 3 of us. I have a dog, but she's eating meat, so I wouldn't be able to add any of that in there, obviously.
Okay, so I think maybe a 3-layer worm condo system would be appropriate for you. And then I would, I think it would take about a month to feed each layer, or maybe 2 months. So by the time you got to the 3rd layer, the bottom layer will be finished compost. And the link that I gave as well for buying red wrigglers, I would recommend www.wormladies.com. They're just, I visited their facility and they're just fanatics. They just love their worms. and you'll get a quality bunch of worms.
Okay, great. Yeah, it would be nice to get.
And by
to
the
be
way, I would
successful.
say, yeah, I would say you should start with maybe a pound or two if you're really inspired. But a pound, they should, I didn't mention this, but in the diagrams have both sex organs. They can't reproduce by themselves, but they can meet up with another worm and match up the male to female, female to male, and will reproduce very rapidly if you feed them. If you feed them consistently more than the population. So I would say with a pound of worms, to get them started, you feed them, a half a pound of food or a quarter of a pound, or you can put in all your kitchen scraps in there and then let them feel how much food you're going to be feeding them. And then they'll reduce to meet your needs.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks for the question.
All right. The next one we're going to move to is Annette Murphy. So Annette, I've enabled your mic. Annette, can you hear us? Annette, you there?
Annette, if you look to the bottom corner of your screen, you need to unmute.
Well, she has unmuted. She
has.
She has unmuted, but we can't hear. Having some technical issues.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, we hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry, had some technical difficulties, but my husband fixed it for me. So my name is Annette, and I have no knowledge about composting, so all of this is very new to me. And it sounds like, based on your presentation, I'll probably be doing some leaf composting. So, so this question isn't directly to composting, but because you mentioned you shouldn't use kitchen scraps with leaf composting, correct?
I mean, again, the wrong materials isn't going to hurt it, and the right materials won't necessarily help it. But if you're gonna do it, I would say go at it. Like, so long as you've got your leaves, that's what's going to turn into your compost. So it's not necessary to have your kitchen scraps in your leaf composting bin.
Okay, perfect. So I can put some of it in there because it's only me and my husband right now anyway, but so we don't, generate that much kitchen scraps. But if I put, just what we generate from that, it shouldn't mess up the leaf composting in general.
Yeah,
is what I'm
no,
hearing.
it should be fine. It should be fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette. By the way, South Glastonbury was selling a composting bin. Mike, are you guys still selling that on your website?
We just did a sale in South Windsor. We partnered together. We did it on the same day a couple weeks back. This is the third time we've done it, and this time was more well received than others because we did it in the spring this year. It was better than the fall. It's kind of been an annual thing. People are very interested. We sold over 70 compost bins a couple weekends ago, and they're bought at a reduced price. Works very well. We sell the rain barrels as well, but the composting is kind of taken off. I think there's been more and more interest in it. So why this program really tied it together.
Yeah, just, so to Annette's question, if you have food scraps, that composting bin, that South Windsor sells is really solid. So if you could put your kitchen scraps in there and then mix it with browns, then you've got the best of both worlds.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Ed next. Ed, I've turned on your mic. Ed, you there?
Hello.
Hi, Ed.
Hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Quick question. Can you compost grass clippings in addition to leaves?
Yes, grass clippings are a great compost material. In fact, I used to collect my grass to compost. Now I just use a mulching feature on my mower so that it fertilizes the grass that I'm cutting on. I used to collect my clippings. Grass the thing about grass is it's considered a green. So for every pound or just think of this, every 10 pounds or 20 pounds of grass you're putting into your composting tub or your composting system, you need twice as much browns. So if you're putting 20 pounds of grass clippings into your compost, you're going to need 40 pounds of dry materials. So most people don't think about that, but 40 pounds of leaves is a lot of leaves, because leaves are basically, weightless, right? You can get like 8 gallons of leaves and it weighs like maybe 5 pounds, right? So yeah, so you should think about the amount of browns that you're adding to the grass clippings.
Well, I live in a wooded area, so I have an endless supply of leaves, but I also have a large lawn. So I got tons of grass as well. And it all just goes on the border at this time, not into my neighbors. And it just sits there and it piles up year after year. And it's sort of like a natural composting pile. It starts to decay all of itself. I don't add anything or subtract, but I don't turn it either. I just watch it decay over the years. But every year you're adding more, and it'd be nice to get rid of some of it, but I don't have all these worms.
So the way that I would use that, Ed, is if you go to that grass pile right now and you pull off the grass that you last dumped on it, underneath, like maybe 3 or 4 inches underneath the grass that you're pulling off, will be the richest, brownest composting humus you've ever seen. You could scoop that out into a wheelbarrow, use it as fertilizer for your lawn. You could use it for your gardens, your flowers, or you could, like when I did in New York, I used to put it in mason jars and give it to my friends that had gardens. I mean, grass compost is just like leaf compost. If it decays by itself, it'll make it into a really great product.
I'm always looking for creative Christmas gifts. Jar of
my label
compost.
used to say, on the mason jar used to say Al's worm poop. It'll be Merry Christmas. I'm giving you a jar of poop.
One other comment on the grass clippings I'll add from a town's perspective. Not that often, but we do sometimes get complaints when people put their grass pile in the backyard and don't do anything with it. It does generate a lot of odor. So if you live close by to somebody, I would just caution you against, because it's when grass and it heats up, as Alastair said, it decomposes pretty quick. And but the odor, we've gotten some odor complaints. So if you get friendly with your neighbor and make sure you have a good relationship if you're going to put it in there, and don't ignore it.
Oh, I won't have that problem because I'm surrounded by woods. So my neighbors have the same issues that I do, is where to put all those damn leaves. And I also have a brook that runs through my property. So for me, I have plenty of room on the border to pile up the leaves. And in fact, at times I have to take the leaf blower and kind of reduce the pile because there's just so much volume, including the grass clippings. It's like I go through seasons and then eventually get the damn acorns, and every other year you get like, God, barrelfuls of those. So it all goes on the border, and I thought maybe I could make use of it somehow, and I'll put it in the gardens. Not that I have any green thumb, but the thing is, it's there, it's natural, it doesn't cost anything. It's just a matter of the time and energy. Like you said, you get the pitchfork, you could turn the stuff, and there's probably some really good stuff on the bottom there that's been sitting there for 10 years. And then I just keep adding the new stuff every year. Okay. Anyways, I'm talking too much. Thank you.
A great formula, Ed, would be your grass clippings with leaves. If you've got like twice the volume. Now, I'm not sure if you're blowing the leaves onto it, or if you're shredding the leaves in your leaf blower and then placing it on your pile. I would shred the leaves somehow and then mix that in with your grass clippings. It'll reduce the odor, to Mike's point, and it'll make for a beautiful compost.
I call it mowing my leaves. I use the John Deere long tractor, the same one that cuts the grass, and it just sucks up the leaf. It's not a mulcher, but it'll mulch it in part. But it puts in these nice bags in the back of the mower. Yeah. They suck up, and eventually you got to get out and dump them on the border, and then you get some more, and it's heavy. It really does add up. And then how many, God, it just keeps every week I'm doing the leaves. So I get tons of the stuff. Anyways.
Yeah, I think
thank
if you add that mulch leaf to your grass clippings, you'll have a great formula for making a lot of great compost.
I got you. Now, how much compost do you use around your plants? I mean, how much?
I
do
would say,
you really
like
need?
every agricultural study again says 2 inches of compost is enough to protect your plants from disease and provide enough nutrition for a year. So you can use it as compost to increase the vitality of your lawn. If you've got a fertilizer spreader, you just put the compost in there instead
Oh,
and spread that on your lawn. That'll be
I
amazing.
never thought of that. Because I just
Yeah,
put the
most
lime
people use
down.
fertilizer killer for their lawn, but they realize that compost is a great pesticide as well as a great nutrient for your grass.
So the chemicals we use on the lawn, the weed prevent, the weed killer, the insect and grub killer, that's not going to harm the composting mixture. I mean, leaves
It
don't
shouldn't.
have that.
I guess you need to look at the MSDF, which is the manufacturer data sheet, to see the half-life and when
Okay.
the material will clear out. Most of household products are generally safe, and by the time you're composting it, there won't be any trace materials left.
I got you.
Again,
Thank you.
if you're using Roundup for your weed killing, all bets are off.
No, it's the other stuff that you got to put 4 times a year, because you got the weed prevent, then the weed killer, and then you have the fertilizer, and then you have the fall treatment.
Ed, you know what? I would love you to see if you could use your compost rather than using these 4 treatments. You would spread it once a year, and I would almost bet that your lawn would be healthier than your 4 treatments, and it would require a lot less labor and a lot less money.
I never even thought of that.
I would love, stay in touch with me, because if you do that, I would love to have that in a presentation where I know this guy that used to spend money on 4 different applications. And what he did was he changed to compost. He spread his compost on his lawn, and his results were this, made it better or made it worse, or, I just have no idea. But I suspect that the compost would be better in terms of fertilizer, maybe not so much in terms of pesticides and weed killing, but I don't know. We don't know. So I'd like to see that.
As an anecdote, we had a compost pile in the backyard when we were kids. My father was into gardening, and we went out in those sub-zero temperatures in the winters with the pot of whatever and trudged to the back in the snow to empty the pea. And we used to call it, you're on peel duty. It was like KP in the Army. We would trudge out in the snow, just throw our galoshes on, dump it in, and run back in the house because it was freezing. But my father didn't waste any opportunity. Didn't matter, rain, snow, sleet, you took a trip. But anyways, those are the old days. Take care. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Ed.
Our next speaker is Joe. Joe, I have enabled your mic.
Hello, thank you. I think I'm unmuted. I don't know if you covered this in the beginning, but Alastair, are the slides available to us?
Yes, I think the towns are going to put the presentation. I'll email them the presentation so they can put that on their website, and maybe they'll be able to get this video recorded and put that on their website as well.
Terrific. Okay, great. And thank you very much. This is terrific.
Okay. All right. Our next speaker is Daniel. Daniel, I have enabled your mic.
Hey guys, how you doing? Are you hearing me all right?
Yes, we can hear
hi,
you.
Daniel.
I just bought the composter bin that Glastonbury provided a couple of weeks ago. And Alastair, if I'm to use your formula for leaves, not the worms, but for the leaves, with that composter bin, shredding everything down and doing a 2-to-1 mix, how long would you suspect before I would get some real compost out of it?
If you're going to start now, if you have leaves in like a forested wooded area and you've got leaves now and you fill that composting bin, I would say that you would be in about a month to a month and a half would be half. And then I'd say in months you should have finished compost. Throughout the winter, throughout the summer, spring and summer in Connecticut, the compost should produce much faster because of the heat. So I would guess 3, maybe 4 months you would have finished product.
And it would move things along if I was to mix up the material that's in there too, to frequently turn it over.
Yes, the turning would only accelerate it. Not necessary with leaf composting, but it would certainly accelerate it. It would make it even faster.
Okay. And then Ed, who you were talking with before, kind of made me think about, I have plenty of leaves like he does out in the backyard, and shredding them down or breaking them down. Does it make sense? And Ed was referencing this about, I have a mower that mulches and I can put a bag on it. Does it make sense to take the leaves, from the previous year that are sitting out in the woods and attempt to mulch them down into the bag? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, the answer would be yeah. If you've got leaves and you've got a mower to pick it up and without bending over, shred it, then that is the ingredient, the only ingredient that my composting recipe requires. You're going to be putting it in a bin. You could also add kitchen scraps and turn it, and that would make it even better. Coffee grains, again, would make it even better, but nothing would be necessary except for the leaves.
And shredded paper is, I think you said, is also a good material to put in. That would be considered a shredded paper?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Good job.
Thank you, Daniel.
Our next speaker is another Barb. Here we go. Barb, I've turned your mic on.
Thank you. It's the same Barb as before. I had another question. Could you just recap again for the 4-bin method? Is that just for general composting, or can you use that for doing your leaf composting as well? And what is the purpose of the holding bin versus the third bin? The complete bin versus the holding bin?
Yeah, so a multi-bin system typically only has 3 bins. And so A and B are the turning bins, and then C is the finished compost bin.
Okay.
If you've got 4, I think I would use A and B to turn, and then when it was finished, I'd put it in C, and then start feeding A and B, and then I think you only need 3 bins. I'm not sure what the 4th one is really for. Anytime you finish compost, you put that in the remaining bin. Maybe it's just a 4-bin system because it's so big. They have a lot of finished compost. So if they're feeding it a lot and turning it a lot, C would get filled, and then A and B would be feeding. And then when you're done with B, you've nowhere to place it because C is filled. So you use C and D as the finished bin system. And then A and B would always be available to keep turning.
Okay, so but it's a system to use for leaf composting or in general, either way.
I would say it's more of an in general system. Again, leaf composting, my recipe doesn't require turning. It just takes time. But if you're going to turn it, it'll produce faster. So if you're going to use a 3-bin system and you have leaves, it's the best of all worlds, because you'll be turning, you have the leaf, and you'll be aerating it and exposing and turning it, which is the best thing you can do for compost. So if you have a 3-bin system, you could use it for leaf composting, you could use it for kitchen scrap composting, you could use it as a combination, but it's the best method of composting because it involves turning. It's also labor intensive, so you got to think about that. But if you've got a 3-bin system, or if you're looking at building a 3-bin system, I think it takes 13 pallets, including a roofing element, to make a 3-bin system. You could, if you're willing to do the work of turning, then that would be the best system to have.
And the reason for the cover, is that just to keep out too much water going into it, or is it to increase the heat?
No, it's really for vermin. If you're going to be kitchen scrap composting, you want to keep out raccoons and coyotes and mice and rats. So you enclose it to keep out, keep out some of the rain, but also to keep it primarily for pests, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Barb.
Okay, our next speaker is Colleen. Colleen, I've enabled your mic. Colleen, are you there? We can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Maybe she might be having issue. Yeah, she seems to be having some issues. She's turned her mic on and off a couple of times. Give her a second. Maybe she'll figure it out. This actually happens a lot. It's amazing how many of these meetings we seem to have people who they realize their mic's not actually working.
Colleen, maybe you could send in your question as a chat. I don't know if you can see a chat box.
Let me see if I can enable that. All right, so I've set it. Yeah, I've enabled Colleen to be able to chat. So Colleen, if you can't, okay, here we go.
Oh,
Can you see it, Alastair?
Yes.
Okay.
Can pine needles be added to the compost bin we bought from the town along with kitchen scraps? Answer, absolutely. Pine needles are a great. The only thing I would say you don't want to compost that's brown is, I think, black walnut. I think the nut as well as the leaves from black walnut are toxic. So you don't want to use black walnut as, but it's pretty much the only leaf that you would not compost. Pine needles are great, particularly if you can get a source of them. You must have a lot of pine trees, otherwise you wouldn't be asking the question. And maybe it falls down brown, and that would be perfect to add with your worm bin, your composting bin that you bought.
And then there's a second
question.
Yeah, this is the actual one from Colleen.
Oh, amazing presentation. Thank you, Colleen. Do you provide school presentations? I'm an inner city school teacher, and much like your attendees from Newman, many students haven't heard of a leaf blower. Right. The answer is yes. I give presentations to schools all the time. You could reach out to me at, if you saw the presentation, but last screen had my contact information, or you could get it from Mike, the organizers. Particularly for schools, they love the worm bin making. And then you can have, maybe we could make one for your class, or each classroom could have one. You could feed it with kitchen scraps, and kids seem to love the worms. So that's a suggestion. But if you want a regular composting presentation, I can do those as well.
Great. Okay, so let me. All right, so I guess that's all of those. So let me ask you a question, kind of along the line. Obviously, I have my own yard that has a ton of trees, and I seem to collect all of my neighbors' leaves as well. Something about the wind coming down my street, it seems like my house seems to get all the leaves. So I mean, we have one of these, we live in a town where the town picks up the leaves. I mean, they filled 2 trucks, literally filled 2 huge trucks with the leaves in front of my yard this past year. So it's like, I have a hard time comprehending that I could actually, compost all of those leaves and still be able to use them. You say you can never have enough compost, but I'm having a hard time thinking that I could compost all those leaves and reuse them. But from the standpoint of a life cycle, if you were to compost those leaves after they fall in the fall, you're really not going to be able to compost them soon enough to be able to probably put them down in the spring, because in the wintertime, they're not going to compost as fast. Is that right?
So the way that, so they will compost over the winter. I find that with my leaf composting, by Christmas, it reduces by half. So half of it is maybe compost or semi-composted. By the spring, it's reduced by half again. And by the spring, it's ready to be used. So the life cycle of my compost starts in September, and then by May, it's ready. It's done.
So you're actually able to use it for various purposes by the springtime.
Absolutely. In fact, my leaf composting is ready for my garden right now.
Right.
Another thing, Bobby, is to think about is when you're getting your leaves carted away, they're full and they're not broken down. So just think about the amount of leaves that they're carting away and then divide that by 10. That's what your leaf compost will look like, which is sounds, and then if you get that figure, so say it's 2 dump trucks divided by 10 is maybe, I guess, a quarter of a dump truck.
Well, you can figure my pile's about 4 feet. I probably got about a 4 foot by 4 foot by 150 feet.
Okay.
That's how much leaves I have in the front yard.
Okay, so then reduce that by 10. So then you're now 4 feet by 4 feet by 15. And then the compost that it'll finish will reduce by a quarter. So 15, say 16, it'll reduce into a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4, 1 Lehigh bin filled with compost, which is amazing. Because you could, you buy Home Depot, that's going to be a fortune.
Yeah.
And then you'll get that every year. That is like an amazing amount of compost. But it's going to be a fair amount of work to shred those leaves. I would use like Ed's idea and use like a lawnmower that sucks up the leaves and mulches it, puts it in the back, and then dump it into a bin.
Yeah.
I mean, you certainly don't need to use all of your leaves either, right? You could get some of it carted away by your town. You could use some of it for your compost. But if I had that many leaves, man, I would love that. Like that end result of it's like basically a quart of compost. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think there was another, let's see. There was another chat that came in. Or two.
Posting the contact info.
You see him?
Yeah, I'm gonna share my. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
I think you got a few chat questions as well, right?
Oh, there's more? Okay.
Yeah.
Can't see. Can you read them? I can't see the chat screen when I'm sharing my screen, apparently.
Let's see. Posting the message. Okay. Let's see. Thank you. So as a beginner, leaves, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps should produce some decent compost by late summer. Not sure if that was answered already.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Mike?
As a beginner, leaves, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps should produce some decent compost by later summer. That's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. If they start now with leaves and kitchen scraps, over the summer, the compost will produce quite quickly. So by late summer, they should have some product.
And Ed did offer his yard for the experiment.
That's great.
And the contact information, that's where I stopped. That was from Colleen. So I think those were all the chat questions, unless somebody's raising their hand that I can't see. Do you have any more, Bobby? Any more raised hands, Bobby? You're muted.
I don't think so. Let me double check. No raised hands.
Okay, and I don't see any more in the chat. I guess with that, I want to thank everybody on behalf of the town of Glastonbury and South Windsor as well. Certainly thanks to Alastair. Like I said, this is our second visit with him. A little different this time with Zoom, but I think it did work. It was a good way for us to at least provide something. We didn't want to lose another year between this, and also want to thank my office staff, South Windsor as well, and certainly our IT folks for helping put this together. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it, and as I think was mentioned earlier, we are planning, and as well as South Windsor, to put this on our website so people can use it as a reference. But again, thank you. If you have any other further questions, certainly you can reach out to Alastair. Certainly don't hesitate to reach out to either the town of South Windsor or the town of Glastonbury, our offices who you're registered with, and we'll certainly field them accordingly. With that, any other final words, Alastair? Because we're done. And again, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No, thank you guys. And thank you to your town, all the interest in composting. Happy composting, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Thank you,
night.
Alastair. This is great. Thank you. Good night, everybody.